Hello and welcome to the Raise Your Voice podcast. Today we're talking with Marty Neumeier, author of The Brand Flip. The Brand Flip is a whiteboard overview of how customers now run companies and how you can profit from it and create more loyalty with your customers. Marty's also written two of my favorite books, The Brand Gap and Zag.
So Marty, you've also written two of my favorite books, The Brand Gap and Zag.
Thank you.
And
the first two books, actually, that I wrote.
Yes, and I've studied those quite thoroughly, and I noted in this book, you said you're really delighted when people write notes in your books and they highlight, and all of my copies of your books, except for this one I'm going to go back through again and highlight it, but are pretty heavily marked up.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So what triggered this book? What led you to writing Brand Flip?
Well, up to this point, I had 5 books out. And the first one was The Brand Gap, which did unexpectedly well. And, that book, I published the book, and it took off pretty quickly. But I also put up... I built a slideshow of about, 160 slides, something like that, to use in my workshops. And someone took that and stuck that, uploaded that to SlideShare, which I'd never heard of. Sort of secretly did that. And then 2 years later, I finally looked online to see what it was, and there was like 2,000 requests for talks and workshops and all kinds of stuff that I had completely ignored because I didn't even know what it was. And by now, that slideshow has been seen over 10 million times. So it's the ideas have been passed around a lot over the last 12 years, and I just feel like a lot has changed in 12 years. And rather than just update that book, I thought I would add to it with a sequel, and so that's what the Brand Flip is.
So, this idea of giving away ideas? Are you good with that? I haven't looked to see if you've given away any slideshows on Brand Flip.
I have not. I don't know if I'm going to, because I think that SlideShare thing worked for me because I was one of the first slideshows up on it, and it just kept getting hits to it and downloads, and it kept it number one for a long time, so a lot of people saw it. Later I put on Zag. You can go there and see Zag, and it's an even better slideshow in my opinion, but far fewer visitors to that one. It's just, it's timing and how fame works and all that kind of stuff. So I think if I did the Brand Flip, some people would see it, but I'm not sure if it's worth it. So, but anyway, I give the ideas away in many ways, including on our website, the Liquid Agency website, in Steal This Idea. So anything that's can be turned into a little series of slides or a tool that you can use, I tend to put that up on our site and just give it away. Or you can just buy the book; it's in there.
Yeah, and I've referred people to the Steal This Idea site, and I refer to that myself quite often because I find a lot of value in it. I'm sure you have a lot of people who say they're students of your thinking, and I'm certainly one of those. And
it's good to hear.
I'm, in some of my reading lately, it's really been made clear that any of our work is a synthesis of what we've learned before until we finally start to find our own voice, and then.
Sure, everybody, recasts everything they see around them in their own way, and so nothing's really original, but it often can have a personal point of view that's interesting. So to say that I own any of these ideas would be kind of silly.
Mm. So I want to just touch on some of what I found to be the key points. I made a couple pages of notes in my journal as I read through. One of the things you talk about is empowering customers, and why is empowering customers more important than ever?
Well, there's 10 things in the book 10 new realities that I made notes of. They're interconnected realities that require us to think about it this way. The first one is that power has shifted from companies to customers because of technology. The second one is that people are not so much focused on products but meaning, and they use that meaning to build their identities. They hate being sold, but they love to buy. Interestingly, they tend to buy in tribes. They tend to buy what their friends buy because it makes them feel safe and successful. And so now the battle is no longer between companies but tribes. And the company with the strongest tribe wins, usually. And these tribes are connected through technology. And so brands need to flow through multiple technologies and across platforms. And therefore, the most successful brands are not static but fluid. So when you consider these 10 changes, you realize that it's really not about the company and the products as much as the customer. And so as I was researching the book, I came across it's pretty famous actually. I came across it again, but a quote from Peter Drucker, the famous management guru, who said, "A business has only one valid purpose, to create a customer." And so that really got me thinking about this book. How do you create a customer? And as a designer, I always think if you try to create everything without applying the principles of design, it's usually a mess. So actually what we want to do is design a customer. And, I don't mean that in some sort of Frankenstein way or Big Brother way, but I think what we need to do is design a space that the best customers can inhabit. They see themselves in that space, and they inhabit that space. Then they tell like-minded friends and so forth, and they build the tribe out from there. So to make that really work, you have to give customers more than just product satisfaction. I mean, you have to sort of bring it up from satisfaction to delight to engagement and finally to empowerment. And empowered customers are the ones you want.
Right. So part of that, what came across to me was that you've got this idea of empathy in there, that in order to empower them, you need to understand them, you need to feel like they feel. So let me run one of Maya Angelou's quotes by, which I'm sure you've heard. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, that's good. That's true.
And I don't know if you've ever considered that. I tell people that's one of the most powerful design and marketing quotes ever written.
Right. So if we apply that to branding, it's all about addressing emotion deeply and not just talking at people, which is, for one thing, if you're talking at people, if it's a one-way conversation, as in traditional advertising, people are just going to discount that because you have no credibility with them. You have a vested interest in selling something, so they're not going to listen to that. But if you can get them to feel a certain way, that helps build the brand, then you're in business. And I think generally it's a kinder way to do business.
It is, because it makes the customer part of your story, and that's one of the...
It makes your customer the hero of your story. I would go that far.
True.
Customers don't want to read stories. They don't want to read your stories. They want to make their own stories up about you and cast themselves as the central figure in it. So the question now is, how do you do that the best way possible? And you were going to say?
Yeah, well, say you talk, and when you talk about what's the best way possible, one of the parts of the book where you talk about the brand commitment matrix, I believe I'm using the right term, is when you look at all the touch points, and that's a word I use as well. Is what are the touch points? Where are the places that you interact with your customers and that they find meaning in interacting with you? And I love how you you broke that into the shallow and deep and general and personal. It made me look at my own company a completely different way when I saw that. Like, I spend too much time in the shallow and general.
Yeah.
Not in that, but even some of the things. So, what about thought leadership, blogging? Do you think that's in the personal and deep or the general and deep area?
Blogging can be pretty personal, I think, because if it's you really expressing your innermost thoughts to one reader at a time, and it's not broadcast to everybody, right? Then it's pretty personal, and it can be fairly deep too. So yeah, I think that's one of the great opportunities in marketing is this thought leadership piece where the leader of a brand or a company can directly address customers. And it doesn't necessarily scale into something large, but for reaching your core tribe, it's unparalleled, really. I think it's an amazing medium, let's say.
Sure. In my mind, it's a matter of you have to keep that tribe at the forefront of your mind, and either whether it's the whole tribe or even almost down to a specific individual in that tribe who represents them, and you write for them as if you're.
Yeah, I mean, you should have sort of an idea of who your ideal customer is. Not every customer, just the most ideal one, and always put yourself in their shoes, and think, what's the next thing I can do to empower this person? What do they need from me? How can I help them in a way that makes me indispensable to their lives?
Yes, that's an excellent way to put that. So, talk to me a little bit about your concept of dividing versus multiplying. I thought that was a really interesting insight.
Yeah, well, it sort of goes back to what's changed about branding. So it used to be that the old model of branding was pretty simple. The company creates a brand, and in the old model, the brand was really a name and a logo and maybe a look and feel and some advertising to support it. That was what they considered a brand in those days. And then the brand, all that stuff, attracts customers, and then the customers buy the products to sustain the company. Pretty simple. And that's sort of been flipped upside down. The same elements are there, but today the company creates customers, going back to Peter Drucker, create a customer. The company creates customers through building a great product and introducing it to a core group of people. Those customers build the brand by telling their friends and categorizing it for their friends. This is this kind of company, and these are the stories I like to tell about it. And then the brand sustains the company. So what's better about that is that brands tend to last longer than customers. They last years and years and years. So customers may come and go, but the brand that they built lasts. It stays there. It lingers. And so you have this good long-term flywheel effect of the brand supporting the company for a long time. I think about how Apple did that. In the early days, they had this passionate group of followers when Steve Jobs started the company, and that even when he left, the brand sustained the company. The people were loyal to Apple just because of the founding ideas of Apple. And then when he came back into the company, he had this standing army that he could manage. So that was a really good demonstration of that. So if you have that, if that's what's changed, that customers now create brands. Now I forget the question. What did you ask?
Oh, we're talking about dividing versus multiplying.
Okay. Right. Okay. So if the idea is to build this core audience, and you find these core customers and they build a brand, then you have to look at things a little differently than traditional marketing. So traditional marketing kind of looked at things as market segmentation. You know, if you're going to start a business, you look at the total market and you calculate the value of that market. You know, it's so many $1 billion a year, or whatever it is, and then you divide the audience up by demographics or psychographics or regions or however you want to do it, so that you can target the ones you think you can win over. So it's like you have this this market that already exists, and then you pick part of it or parts of it, and you segment those by different features in the products or different messages to different groups of people, different campaigns, and so forth. And that works really well as long as the market already exists. But in a time of extreme change, like we're in now, a lot of the best markets have yet to be created. So a better way to do that is to, find a niche that you think is going to grow, that you can grow, and then find your core customers and give them the tools they need to start building the brand and grow it out from there. So instead of divide and conquer, which is what market segmentation does, keep all those different groups apart from each other so they don't know what we're saying to each of them. It's multiply and conquer, where you say the same thing to your core group, and they help you multiply the audience, and it grows exponentially if you're lucky. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, no, that for me was again causing me to reframe the way I'm looking at some things with some new initiatives I'm doing at my company, and how that could affect some of our nonprofit sector clients who then want to reach their donors and constituents more effectively. And this idea of marketing automation makes it really easy to segment and at the same time personalize some nurturing, create some nurturing streams. But if you take that and flip it and make it that it's more about multiplying than segmenting,
it's about building a tribe from something very small or from nothing, right? So the question to ask isn't how big is the market, because there may not be a market, or how big is the audience. It's you and what army. I mean, how are you? Who's going to help you build this brand? And so you have to build your army. You have to build your community of your brand cohort who's going to help you do this. Yeah.
Well, I'm really interested in revisiting that section of the book as well, just so I can have a really clear idea of that. And I appreciate hearing you talk it through, because it makes a great companion for reading as well.
Yeah. So the thing about a tribe is, the way I'm using the term as a brand tribe, it's a group of people with similar interests who share information. And if you find that you're actually having to talk with two different groups that don't share information, right, then you have two tribes, and therefore you should have two brands. You shouldn't have the same brand addressing two audiences, because that's the rule, one brand per audience, or one brand per tribe. You can grow the tribe and you can make it sort of multifaceted, but if you find yourself selling things to people who never talk to each other or share information, then you're really undermining part of your brand. You need to start another brand. Just step up to the plate and start another brand with a different tribe. Yeah,
and that can be expensive. That can be time consuming, and
but it's the only thing that really works in the long run. So
right,
you just have to.
Yeah. And I understand. I can say I understand that completely, because I had my former company and my new company, Aspire, and I was splitting my time and having to speak two different languages to two separate audiences, and just decided, okay, it's time to not maintain two brands and just move into one.
Yeah, it's inefficient. It splits your passion. If you have a passion-driven company, like the best ones usually are, it's really difficult to split your mind in two. And that's basically what companies do. They split into different divisions with different customers, trying to leverage, as the word is most people use, leverage the same brand. In other words, not spend money creating a whole new brand. But I think it's it makes you vulnerable to companies that are more focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and focus is what I find so many times people are lacking. And and when they're not focused, you can tell when they're not focused because they have no clarity.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that goes back to they don't quite understand what their purpose is, which you referenced several times.
Yeah, I think purpose is important. You have to know why you're doing this beyond making money. If you weren't making money, or if the business was doing badly, or the organization were doing badly, would you keep going? That's always a good, or if you won the lottery, would you come back to work the next day? And if the answer is no, you should go someplace else and do something you really love, because that passion is going to sustain you. It's going to drive you forward. Passion is kind of, it's better than time management. Passion management is what you really want to do, because passion can stretch forever. Time cannot. There's only so many hours in the day, but passion is very flexible. So you need passion. Then you need to focus that passion in a competitive way, and then you figure out what makes you the only. We're the only group that does something that's valuable, and then you just keep building your touch points and products and communications to emphasize that and to drive it forward. And then you'll start to see customers telling stories about you. And if you pay attention to what they're saying, you can start to hear your future. There's always customers who will be ahead of you. They'll be out there in front suggesting things that you should do next. And once you identify those people, you kind of have a sketch of what your future is going to look like. You can see what people are already going to want, and they're part of your decision-making process, which is something that we didn't have before because customers and leaders were cut off from each other.
Yes. So really, listening and engaging needs to be top-down or bottom-up, however.
It needs to be both ways, yeah.
Leadership model is. Yeah, and it depends on your leadership model. And granted, there are so many companies that are still top-down, and the servant-led type companies who are really purpose-driven and passion-driven, they lead in a sense from the bottom up because of the empowerment that happens within, and then the empowerment.
It's about what my mother told me when I was a teenager. She said, "Well, do you ever feel like being a leader of something?" And because at the time I was a leader of nothing, I think I feel like I can do it in some way. I just haven't figured it out. I don't know how to do it. She goes, "Well, you just find a parade and get in front of it."
Yeah.
So that's what this allows you to do. Social media is you find the parade, you watch it forming up, and you go out and get in front of it and you lead it where it wants to go, but maybe didn't know, exactly how to do it. So you organize people and you get them to go where they already wanted to go.
Love that. I wrote that down here. That's good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, our parents tend to pass wisdom on that sticks with us and informs our work even today.
Yeah. Usually, right. And sometimes they give you very bad ideas too. But you need. It's funny though. The good ones are the ones you usually reject when you're young, and later you realize, boy, that was smart.
True, very true. So one last question. Well, no, let me say two last questions for you.
Okay.
One is, you wrote, the success of design is not in how much you spend, but how you spend it. And that is a discussion I have pretty much every week with people. And a lot of companies just think of design and brand-related activities, product-related activities as a checklist. We have to do this, this, this. No, we figure out how much that costs. We check it off. We write the checks to everybody, and we've done our job, instead of thinking about what outcome you want, which is really somewhat unrelated to the amount of money you spend. Mm-hmm. And you referenced, too, that there's a clear difference in the companies who invest in design in terms of their performance financially and those that don't.
Yeah, they tend to do much better over the long haul, and it's sort of stunning the numbers that you get. Design-focused companies are, maybe their profits are like 25% higher on average, something like that, depending on the industry. So it's hard to know exactly how that works, because it may be that they're just on the cutting edge everywhere in their business, not just in design. But I tend to think that they're really looking out for their customers when they spend money on design. It's like, how can we really, excite them, delight them? And once you start doing that, you're definitely on the right track. You're starting to flip your brand, and bring it into the 21st century. It's all about what happens on the customer end of it, and you have to work backwards from there. Instead of thinking about how can we do this cheaply or what's the most efficient way to do that, that's really old school, and it comes from a manufacturing mindset of everything has to be cheaper, right? So, but Apple never says that. Their products cost twice as much as they should, given that they had competitors doing Apple-like products for half the price, better products actually, from a functional standpoint, but they weren't offering the emotional benefits and the vision of Apple, and so they failed, even at half the price.
Right. Well, and if you think about that, the design being the interface between product or service and the buyer, the consumer, the customer, then it doesn't make sense that a company would not be investing in design at a significant level to make sure that experience, whether it be a product or a service, creates the emotional connection that they want with the customer.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say investing, because that sounds like you spend more, you get more, which is true when you're doing it right. But most people, if you commit yourself to being a designful company, using design in every part of your company, you'll be more innovative. You'll spend less money for greater results. You'll delight your customers more. All the stuff comes with it. If you use design in every possible way, from not just posters and toasters, graphic design and products, but also your systems, your relationships with customers, your thought leadership, your internal operations. Everything in business can be designed. It can be, you can look at it so use your imagination to improve every part of it. And companies who do that just do better. Their profit margins are significantly better.
Yeah. I call that idea mission-driven design. So if you've got a specific mission you're wanting to accomplish, then you're designing a process. Everything you're doing has to be designed to achieve that.
Yeah, it's running a company or organization purposefully. From the very core of it, which is this passion that's made you do this kind of work in the beginning, all the way out to how do we become the no-brainer choice for our customers, our audience.
Well, great. Well, thank you. So I appreciate all your insights, and I really encourage both if you're a for-profit company or even a nonprofit to understand how your customers want you to engage them. That Brand Flip is a fabulous read, and you're right. It only takes a couple hours, but if you really want to dive into it, I would say you need to invest another 4 or 5 to really take your time and go through all the sections. So I have one last question, and this is just based on some things people have shared with me, but I'm just wondering, do you think the word brand is overused or misused?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. Well, I think it mostly suffers from its older definition, which was that a brand is a logo, or it's a package of things that's just all about the surface of a company, and that has to change. It has changed, and so, but you still, I still have clients who say they'll look at a package design, and they'll say to the designer, "Can we make the brand a little bigger on that package?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like I feel like saying, "No, we can make the logo bigger if that's going to do any good. But if you want to make the brand bigger, that takes quite a commitment to a lot of different things. So a brand is not a logo. It's a gut feeling that customers have about your company or your product or your service, and that gut feeling is what you're trying to have a little bit of control over or influence. Let's say you cannot ever control it, which is part of the flip, is that customers control your brand. You only give them the raw materials that they can build stories out of and experiences out of.
Yeah, and I quote you all the time when I tell people, brand's not what you think it is; it's what your customers think it is. And that when you said that, it reminded me of that illustration. I think it was in the Brand Gap of the pipe, and it was, did it say? Or no, it was the Nike swoosh, and it said, "This is not a brand" in French.
Yeah, the René Magritte painting. This is not a pipe.
Right.
And so the subtle joke in it is it's a painting of a pipe. So, a brand is not a logo is not a brand. It's a symbol for a brand. So that's the analogy.
Exactly. Yes, and a symbol is an excellent way to put it. That I think really frames that.
Yeah.
And you stepped through the definition of brand very well in Brand Flip, and that's another section I want to go back and really review again, so that I'm using the right language when I talk. So
good.
Thank you.
I think it pays to be really precise about your brand, and because it helps you think about it in a different way. And if you think about it as a reputation instead of a set of touch points, then it puts you in the right frame of mind to understand it and to manage it.
Right, because touch points those are pretty much tactics, and
those experiences are the building blocks of the brand. You can't control an experience because it's not your experience; it's your customer's experience. But you can get it in the frame where it works for people, right? So you have a little control over it. The more control you can get, the better. But don't ever kid yourself that you're totally in control of your customers. You aren't, and that's part of the flip. Is that they have their own lives, and as long as you're important to them, they will pay you back with interest.
Excellent way to put that. Well, thanks for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I know how busy you are, and I think you're just back from your book promotion tour.
I'm still in the middle of it. You sort of go out on these forays, and but by the end of this fall season, I think that part will be done, and it'll just be a few years of doing the workshops and talks and so forth. I mean, I've been talking about the Brand Gap for 12 years now, so it never ends. There's always someone who needs to hear how this works. So I'm looking forward to many years talking about the brand flip and showing people how to use the matrix and so forth.
Great. Well, that gives me hope, because I'm in year 2, and I'm starting to actually get more speaking opportunities and on my book. And
yeah, good. Well, it takes 10 years. If your book is successful, it'll feel successful in the beginning. I mean, people will start asking you to talk about it and so forth. But it doesn't really pick up for about 10 years when everybody finally discovers it. That's just my experience with the Brand Gap. I remember after 2 years of giving workshops with my company, my staff was saying, we got to go on to something else. People are just getting tired of this Brand Gap thing. You just can't keep milking this same thing. And I was skeptical of that, and now it's sort of proved that, no, there's more people interested in it now than there were 10 years ago. So, no, it doesn't go away. If the ideas are good and fairly timeless, it takes that long for the rest of the world to pick up on it. Just you have to realize that it's going to be a while, but that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, it gives your book a long life.
Right, and for me, it's impetus to be able to sell all the copies I had printed. So I was like,
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, you never know, right? I mean, I published Critique magazine, And the way printing works is you don't want to print just a few. It costs too much. You want to print a lot, and then you just really make sure that you sell all those. And so we were printing this deluxe magazine, the finest printing money could buy. And it cost $18 a copy for people to buy it in the store. Enormous amount of money. But we couldn't sell all of them, so we had, they were just piling up. And we had to sell about 10,000 copies per issue. But because it's a magazine, they just basically sat around because no one wanted an old magazine, as if the old ones were no longer valid. But that's the mindset around magazines. Books, however, can last, 10, 15, 20 years, unless they're really tied to the present, But if they're timeless, they can go for a long time.
Sure. Well, I do really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, and you too. And I remember I was at one of your Brand Gap workshops up in New York. I don't know if you remember.
That was a while ago, so no, I don't.
Yeah.
Really.
It was Rochester. It was probably 15 years ago.
Oh, okay, Rochester. Yeah.
Right.
That was fun. Yeah, I remember you. Yeah.
I drove there, and I keep your books around and I study them, and I think there's a gap between Zag and Brand Flip where I don't have the other ones, but.
Well, if you really want, and this goes for your listeners too, if you want to challenge yourself to a book that's not like these, not the really simple one, but is packed with ideas that have not really been exploited. If you're looking for what the future is going to look like, particularly the future of education, but also of business, pick up Meta Skills. Meta Skills is my favorite book, but it's not for everyone. It's for people who like to think about what they're reading and aren't just looking for tips, but are looking for really basic insight into what the future could look like.
You've been listening to the Raise Your Voice podcast with Brian Sooy. Our conversation today was with Marty Neumeier, author of The Brand Flip. To hear more conversations like this, visit aspire.com, that's AESPIRE.com, or search for the Raise Your Voice podcast on iTunes.